three-act story structure exists in all kinds of popular media, and I believe when we can identify all the pieces of it readily, it makes us better storytellers. I'm Mike Quackenbush, and this is Till We Make It, and I'm going to begin what I hope will be a recurring series of videos here on Till We Make It that we will call Movies Are Matches. And that's because I want to break down movies into their three-act structure and explain and explore the components so that you can see how that underlying skeletal system informs the story's beginning, middle, and end. Act 1, 2, and 3, which is exceptionally analogous with the way we assemble most professional wrestling matches, with the shine or promise, the heat or rising tension, and the comeback or climax. And if you happen to know anything about me, then you already know there isn't a Marvel movie I've ever missed, and those kinds of universes that neatly mind their mythology and continuity are right up my alley. That's why I chose for week 1 of Movies Are Matches none other than the most obvious choice, Paddington 2. The 2018 film Paddington 2 is just 97 minutes long, along with 6 minutes of end credits for a total runtime of 103 minutes. But I'm not going to count those last 6 minutes of end credits as part of the story because they don't tell any part of the story. And, just so you're forewarned, massive Paddington spoilers ahead. Let's start by breaking down the shine or promise that takes place in Act 1 of Paddington 2. And the first act of the movie runs just 21 minutes. So overall, when we're looking at the total runtime of the movie, sans those end credits, 22% of the movie's runtime is the shine. It's the part of the movie that sets up everything we need to know to enjoy the rest of the story. Everything we've got to know about the characters, the way they relate to each other, and the way they relate to the story world is explained to us in those first 21 minutes. The shine, or Act 1, of a wrestling match serves a really essential function in that it informs us about any key characteristics we need to know about the players in the ring. Do they possess certain character traits that will be relevant to the way the rest of the story is going to play out? And if so, we've got to establish that to the audience before the first act is over. The first act of a movie, just like the first act or shine of a match, serves a really important function in that it must inform the audience of any key characteristics of the players so that the rest of the performance makes sense. If there's something we need to know about the two players in the ring, you've got to establish it in the first act so that the rest of the story is congruous to the audience. And you may alternately know the shine as the promise, and that is because we are making a promise to the audience that these characters will remain true to the characteristics they evince until the performance is completely over. For example, if we tell you in the first act that a character is courageous, we are making you the promise this character will remain courageous throughout the performance, the match, or the movie. So let's do a little bit of a deep dive into exactly what Act 1 of Paddington 2 tells us about each of these characters so that we're ready to enjoy the rest of the film. Up first, we need to know that Paddington uses conventional items that humans might need on an everyday basis, like a toothbrush, in very unconventional ways. We see Paddington using a toothbrush to clean out his ears. And we need to know that Paddington wants to get his Aunt Lucy a very special birthday gift, and that gift is at Gruber's Antique Shop. There's also a cast of supporting characters, and we need to understand what's going on with them as well to enjoy the rest of the story, and for the third act, the climax or comeback, to hit home hard. So we need to know that Mrs. Brown has been practicing her swimming and her diving, and we also need to know that Mr. Brown was once an ace at throwing coconuts. We also need to know that the Browns' son Jonathan has been studying steam trains and that their daughter, his sister Judy, has started her own newspaper which she prints filled with stories from the neighborhood. And in the first act, we also establish the villain, the antagonist of the piece, Phoenix Buchanan, a once famous star who has been down on his luck and just can't seem to catch a break. All of that together is everything we need to enjoy the rest of the story before those end credits finally roll. And all of it is told to us in the first 21 minutes of the film. And we transition from Act 1 into Act 2 at the 22-minute mark when someone breaks into Gruber's antique shop and steals the gift Paddington wanted for his Aunt Lucy. Within seconds of us learning everything we need to know in Act 1, so that we can enjoy the rest of the story, we immediately transition into Act 2, the rising tension or the heat of the story. There's no wasted time, there's not a wasted scene, there's no wasted dialogue. We're told everything that we need to know to enjoy the story, and then the meat of the story begins immediately. And in matches, just like in movies, Act 2, or the rising tension, serves the same goal. This is when obstacles or hurdles are put in front of the protagonist, making it more and more difficult for them to accomplish their goal. And we know what Paddington's goal is in this movie. He wants a book for his Aunt Lucy's birthday. It was at Gruber's antique shop, and the heat begins the moment that book is stolen. So placing aside the plot of the movie for a second, what might be some analogous goals for our hero or babyface character to pursue in the structure of a pro wrestling match? Well, it could be as simple as the babyface is trying to drive the action toward their finishing move. That's the goal, the completion of their finishing move. Or it could be that they're looking to exact revenge against the antagonist, the heel of the piece. Or, probably the most common of them all, is simply to win, to prevail. That is the goal of the babyface character or hero in a pro wrestling match structure. And any of those goals, even the most common of them, are always valid. But something that is true of the second act of any well-told story, be it this movie we're talking about or the next match that you're going to have, is that it will feature obstacles arising that make it seem increasingly unlikely, if not impossible, for the hero character to accomplish their goal. And the bigger those obstacles become, the higher the stakes feel, and the more dramatic tension is mounted throughout the second act or heat. The more obstacles that we can place in front of the hero character in any story, the more unlikely it seems that they will accomplish their goal, and thus, the hotter the heat burns. There's a lot to love about Paddington 2, but here's one thing I happen to love about the way this movie is structured. Every time it looks like Paddington might be getting a little closer to accomplishing his goal, something huge changes that actually ends up putting him further away. And the more that tension is heightened, the more I want to see that little bear prevail. So let's turn our attention to the second act, the heat of Paddington 2. What kind of obstacles occur in this story? Well, the first major obstacle is introduced at the very top of the second act. Paddington is arrested, tried, and wrongly jailed for the theft of the book from Gruber's antique shop. And as if seeing Paddington in jail isn't bad enough, within hours of arriving in jail, he's made enemies of everybody else in the prison. All the outlandish, motley, hardened criminals in this prison hate this adorable little bear. The second act wastes no time in putting all kinds of substantial obstacles in front of Paddington, making it seem exceptionally unlikely that he's going to accomplish his goal. And then, thankfully, we get a hope spot. Whether it's in a wrestling match or it's in a movie, a hope spot serves the exact same function. It briefly alleviates some of the tension. It doesn't remove the obstacles, but it does create the appearance that the hero, the babyface character, is gaining forward momentum before it is once again interrupted. And so not long into the heat of Paddington 2, we do get a little bit of a hope spot. The nastiest criminal in the entire prison, Knuckles McGinty, becomes Paddington's ally. And so for a brief moment, we are relieved. Paddington is under the protection of Knuckles McGinty while he's in the joint. But immediately, more obstacles start to appear. And this isn't just a reiteration of existing obstacles, new obstacles begin to appear. For example, the Brown family, who of course are outside of prison trying to clear Paddington's name, begin infighting amongst themselves over how they should go about doing it. And they become a divided front. They were making progress when they were united, but now they're all fighting against each other and they're not getting anywhere. Although the second act is peppered with a few other very charming hope spots, things continue to get worse. The person who stole the book, the villain of the piece, Phoenix Buchanan, appears to be getting away with it. He is clever and he is resourceful, and he seems to be outsmarting anyone and everyone that's pursuing him. And as the second act is drawing to a close, things get even worse because Paddington escapes from prison, and now the police are chasing him through the streets. Once all of these obstacles have finally been put in place, it's time for the third act, the climax or comeback. And in Paddington 2, that occurs 79 minutes into the runtime. And the third act begins as Paddington and the Browns learn that they can prove Buchanan was the thief and clear Paddington's name, but they've got to do it before Phoenix Buchanan leaves town on a train in about an hour. And keep in mind where we're at in the overall structure of a film that runs just 97 minutes long. Our third act has got only 18 minutes. That means, by a wide margin, the meatiest part of this entire story has been Act 2, where all the obstacles are put in front of the babyface, making it seem exceptionally unlikely that the goal will be achieved. It's here in the third act that we see our babyface is only able to prevail once we've called back all the characteristics that we set up in the first act. Everything we learned about the essential characters in this film plays an essential role in the hero prevailing. When our babyface can only prevail in the story using those characteristics we were promised in The Shine or Act 1, it makes us very tidy storytellers. Well, Paddington is only able to recover the book for Aunt Lucy by using an item commonly used by human beings in a very uncommon way. In this case, he uses toffee apples. And the villain of the piece, Phoenix Buchanan, can only be apprehended thanks to Jonathan Brown's knowledge of steam trains and Mr. Brown's incredibly accurate tossing of coconuts. And it turns out that Paddington can only be saved from drowning by the diving and swimming skills cultivated by Mrs. Brown. If all of this hasn't convinced you already to go and watch Paddington 2, you should probably pause this right now and go ahead and do so. There's a number of effective false finishes in this third act, and just to preserve a little bit of the magic of the movie, I'm not going to spoil them all here. However, I would be curious to know, which of the false finishes in the climax of Paddington 2 did you bite on? What got you to react? And can you tell why? What was it about those false finishes that made them so compelling to you? And I bet as we break this down in the comments section below, we're going to discover ways in which we can craft more compelling false finishes for our wrestling matches based on the lessons we learned from, of all things, Paddington 2. One last structural note I want to call out about Paddington 2. 59% of this movie's runtime is the heat. It's the rising tension. It's when the stakes continually get raised and more obstacles are put in between Paddington and his goal of getting the perfect birthday gift for Aunt Lucy. Do you think that third act, the climax or comeback, would feel as satisfying if less time had been spent making sure that tension rose? I happen to be of the opinion that it would not. Part of the reason that third act feels so satisfying to you as a viewer is because of how expertly they laid all of these obstacles out in front of Paddington, only then in the third act for each of them to be not negated, but overcome by specific things we were promised back in The Shine. I am eager to hear your comments about this down below in the comments section, and I would also love your suggestions for other movies that we might be able to break down and examine the skeletal system within to draw better analogies to pro wrestling matches and to help all of us become better storytellers when it comes to the structural element of what we do in the ring. An exploration of three-act structure can be found in my book, 7 Keys to Becoming a Better Performer, a book for fellow pro wrestlers. However, there is an entire chapter in the book called A New Skeleton, which is devoted to ideas outside of that structure that you might be interested to explore. And that exploration can begin over on Amazon.com or at Audible.com, both of which happen to have copies of 7 Keys to Becoming a Better Performer, a book for fellow pro wrestlers, written by yours truly.